What is up, everybody? Canuck here, and we're going to answer the question today, or at least we're going to try to answer the question, how do I get my course that coveted tour-worthy status over on TGC Tours? Now, for those that aren't sure what TGC Tours is, this is the website that I am on right now. It is kind of the primary third-party PGA 2K21 website, so this is where you go for tournaments and course design, and we've got amazing forums, and we're primarily going to talk about the course database because this is where people can take their brand new courses, submit them. We've got a team of amazing reviewers, and they will either mark your course to be not approved, approved, or tour worthy. So just kind of to break that down, approved mean your course is great, it's going in the database, but it's probably not going to show up on one of our TGC Tours tournaments. So the ones that really get looked at are the ones with that tour-worthy status. So how do you get tour-worthy status? Well, myself and Ben, B101, who's going to be joining us here shortly, we're going to try to break down, well, we're going to try to give you as many tips and tricks as we can to help you guys maybe get over that hump from approved into tour worthy. So just a little background, I actually oversee all the reviews. I don't review all the courses, that's not what I mean, but I'm technically the head reviewer at TGC Tours, and Ben is a reviewer, so he is one of our, well, they're all amazing guys, but yeah, definitely one of our top and most active reviewers. So he is constantly looking at courses and, you know, marking them not approved, approved, or tour worthy. So we're going to kind of break down into a few sections what we are generally looking for. So we're going to break them down. We're going to talk about hole design, sculpting and surfacing, greens, and aesthetics. So, I mean, those are pretty broad. There's a ton more, but we're going to try to cover as much as we can in those 4 topics. So, Ben, take it away, and he's going to get things started with hole design.
So in looking at tour-worthy courses, the first thing that always springs to mind for me is variety and consistency. Do all the holes feel like they belong on the same plot, but are you still adding interest in terms of where you're positioning hazards and that variety in terms of how the holes play? Things you want to bear in mind are pars in order, distances, so are all your par 4s different distances, balances of dogleg rights and doglegs left, where are you placing the hazards? Are you always putting bunkers at 295? If so, generally doesn't work too well. Central bunkers, have you overused them? Things like that. In terms of placing your hazards, whether you're making sure that you're placing them so that they influence how people play a hole. There's very little worse than a golf hole where the hazards don't really make much of an impact because you've just put them right down the side of a fairway, where it's just going to penalise a bad shot anyway. So a hole like this, for example, well, we're going to get a better line to the green the more we carry the big hazard down here. Gives you a better angle, you're more able to hit out those pins. Further away you play, the harder that shot becomes. Things like that where there's a variety of ways to play the hole, and we'll talk about that later, but your hazards do actually have an effect. And that balancing factor for me is crucial. It doesn't have to be perfect, and I don't think I've ever seen a course that is perfect for this, but you have to be thinking about it and engaging the player in a variety of different ways. Within that, you also want to think about your hazards when you're playing with wind. Test your course on medium to high winds, even if you're not intending it to be played as such. Test it on high winds from all directions as much as you can to get a feel for, oh, if I play in southeast, suddenly the whole course becomes really, really long and really difficult. Things like that. You also want to check your runner pars. So if we go and have a look at our scorecard, this I think most people do pretty well, but check your distances, check your pars, and make sure that we're not just hitting the same length of par 4 every single time. And if they do happen to be similar, say here 5 and 7, well, if they play in the opposite direction, they're going to play very differently day to day anyway. So as long as you're thinking about this stuff, that will help. On an individual hole basis, you also want to be looking at width of fairways. Like if someone is playing off the back tees, have you given them enough width where, now not every course has to be super wide, far from it, but are you making it so that driver is pinched but it's still a viable option? Whereas if we lay up, rather than just having one perfect layup spot, can we basically have freedom of choice? Because when again you start factoring in wind, directions, etc., the more you're providing those different options, but with a range of choices in between. So like, let's look at this hole. Well, you've got a segment of fairway out here, but you could just bail into the middle, or you can go long, or you can go long down here. You can play back here, load back here. There's loads of stuff that you can do, whilst there are some like preferred choices. Try to cater to everyone playing the course at the same time. In terms of your consistency then, what you don't really want to do is have one hole that is, say, 60 yards wide fairway, and then you go to the next hole and it's like 20 yards, because that's going to feel like they're not very cohesive. Equally, you don't want to jump between big raggedy bunkers and small circle bunkers, and then you're going for like church pews on the next. Like, try to have a vision for your course at the start and really stick to it. That will make a big difference. I guess the final one in terms of your individual holes is, don't really try to force that variety and get to, say, a hole 16 and go, okay, well I've bunkered the inside of the dogleg before, so I can't do that again. Of course you can, because sometimes the place on which it is in the round will make a big difference, and directions can matter as well. As long as you're thinking about those things, it'll get a little bit easier. But really, for me, big picture variety and consistency between those ideas, that's going to make the biggest difference in what you do.
All right, next we are going to talk about sculpting and surfacing. Very, very important parts, obviously, of the course design process, but I think kind of pretty simple in terms of what you need to accomplish here. And basically, it's just trying to keep things smooth and natural. Okay, bold undulations can be good, but if they look to the point where they're jarring or they don't really fit in with the rest of the natural landscape, then that really can affect not only the playability, but also the look of the golf course. So definitely things that we need to think about there. In terms of your surfacing, again, something Ben will talk about when he talks about greens, but just sizing, keeping your sizing relatively realistic. Use this measure tool, okay? Use it a lot. Measure lots, okay? So measure fairway widths, measure bunker sizes. Try to keep things consistent through all 18 holes, okay? Now, do all the fairways have to be exactly the same size? Can there be narrow and wide fairways? Of course there can be, okay? But to the point where, you know, we don't want a 15-yard wide fairway and then a 200-yard wide fairway, okay? That would be a point where we'd be like, not sure that's going to work, okay? And then, yeah, transitions, keep those smooth kind of within your surfaces. So, you know, for example, the classic green to fairway transition, I've showed you guys that in the Course Design 101 tutorials. So just keeping those transitions nice, neat, and clean. They may be small, but again, when you're looking at that difference between approved and tour worthy, that is something reviewers are definitely looking at. So, yeah, I mean, just to recap, keep things smooth, okay? Make sure that your undulations make sense. We want undulations kind of in fairways and stuff to have to be interesting and to matter, but also keep it to the point where, you know, the undulations make sense.
The next thing we're going to look at is greens, sculpting and sizing. Now for me, the first thing I'd look at is your size of your greens. Don't make them too small, don't make them too large, but have a framework. So for me on this course, I'm going for slightly bigger greens than normal. Normally I'd go for about 35 yards by about 25. So this one probably fits. Or The alternative is when you are splining it, you'll see that it's counting up the yardage. Go for around 95 to 100 as like a standard. 105 to 110 would be big. 80 would be very, very small. So bear that in mind. Sometimes you can vary it. So if it's a very short par 3, you might want a smaller green. If it's a very long par 4, you might want a bigger green. It's got to be receptive to the type of shot that you're hitting. And that's kind of the next point. Your greens should really be fair considering the length of shot that you're hitting in. Now if it's a par 5, we don't mind a tricky green because you're not expected necessarily to get there in 2. If this were a par 4, we'd be softening the green because 200 yards, well, you're expecting to hit that green, so therefore it should be pretty receptive. So bear in mind relation to par as well and distance, but generally your greens should allow imperfect shots. If you are finding that you're having to replay the shot 10 times to get it even to stay on the green or close to the pin, you probably want to look at it again. It's also generally a good rule of thumb on your greens to have slopes that both hurt as well as help. So if you look at this little spine here, well, that's going to funnel the ball closer to these 2 pins whilst taking it away from this one. So for these 2 it helps, this one it hurts. These 2 pins are going to be dicier, particularly the one at the back. As a par 5, I don't really mind that. If we leap over to another hole, say, let's look at this one. Kind of a similar concept, but you've got all world short to land it on. I guess this is another thing we see quite a lot. If a green is running from front to back, so going downhill, you have to allow a huge amount of space in front for the ball to land and release, because if you're asking someone to land the ball right here and stop it here and it's going away, it's just not fun to play, particularly let's say it's downwind. You've just given nobody any chance of getting close. In terms of the slopes themselves, just try to avoid them being super severe. If your red slopes are going for generally, let's say, more than, I don't know, 4 green grid boxes, then I think we're into territory where it's a bit more dicey. And you'll end up with some really dodgy putts and shots because of that, unless it's really well done. Your 4 pins on any green that you make should feel like a little bit different but still cohesive. So if we go back to 9, well, these 2, they're still on the same green and the same area of the green, the same little plateau, but this mound here will make them play pretty differently, because if you're approaching from down here, well, one of them you're going over the mound and trying to hit a little bit longer, one of them you're going short. It's part of the same hole, but it does feel different. If you're finding it tough, and generally we see this with approved courses, to find 4 distinct places for pins, like often they'll just be like, there's a clear pin here, clear pin here, clear pin here, and the rest of it might be unusable or it's too small. That's a good sign for an approved course rather than a tour-worthy one. Equally, if you've got a giant green and you're finding that you could put 8 or 9 pins on there, you probably want to look at your sizing there as well. As for the pins themselves, the only rule we have is still that the one box, so this one green grid box around the pin, shouldn't have red in it. In all honesty, stick to the 9 box rule anyway, it generally helps. One other thing that I tend to look at as it's just not good for playability, don't crown your pins, and by that I mean raise the land underneath the pin so that whatever putt you've got breaks away from the pin. It's just a really crap way of adding difficulty, and it's not very realistic, and you'll just end up annoying people if it does get on tour. So if we see that, even if it's a tier, so like this one for example is about as close as I would go to it, the ball is not going to roll away down these slopes, but that's the closest I will get to a crowned pin, and even then I'll touch it up. Haven't quite finished it yet. But try to make it so that there's always one general slope, so that you can always leave an uphill putt somewhere, I guess, as well. In terms of greens, I think that's about it. I guess the main one would always be make them receptive to the shot that you're asking people to hit, and also if people miss the fairway, so if they end up here, do they still have a shot at getting it on the green? Now sometimes, if you play a really, really bad shot on a long 4, and you've given them a really generous fairway, trying to find a long 4, let's say it's 15, and you've hit an awful shot and you've ended up here, and you're in the heavy rough and you've got 220 yards, it may be that you can't reach the green. That's okay, But what we shouldn't have is you landing just off the fairway, and because you've, say, bunkered the front of the green really heavily on a long par 4, you've just got no shot at making the green because you've only ever play tested from the fairway. Just think about misses as well.
All right, aesthetics, planting is next. So hole design and sculpting, obviously the primary main points of making a good golf course, but making a golf course that looks great and feels like not only is it a golf course, but it's also an environment that you've created, somewhere where you can get immersed in. That is another thing reviewers are really looking for. So, golf courses, once you get the hang of the tools, pretty much anyone can make a golf course, but can you make an environment? Can you make something really stand out? Okay, that's something that we really like to pay attention to when we're looking at the aesthetic part. So when we're thinking about things like this, we're mostly thinking about natural looks with planting, for instance. So, for example, this part of my course construction series course that I'm working on. So this is kind of a little kind of natural ditch here. So I figured, this whole area is going to kind of be planted in a similar way. I see a lot of golf courses where some designers think, oh, I don't really have a lot of planting here. I need to do some planting. I got to plant for the sake of it. But it just doesn't match. The planting just abruptly stops. So like I talked about in the sculpting and surfacing part of the video, the same thing applies for planting, okay? Make it bleed into the natural environment, okay? Scaling, sizing of plants, okay? Try to avoid what I like to call the Jurassic Park bushes. So a lot of people tend to get into that habit of making bushes or trees really big to kind of like, oh, this big bush will help me plant less and save less on the meter. Yes, technically, but if it looks unrealistically too big, then that can really deter from the look of your course. So keep away from the Jurassic Park bushes for sure. Yeah, so scaling as well, sizing of plants, like your tree lines, okay? Make sure you're mixing up size, shape, rotation. You're sinking things into the ground. So almost all of my bushes here I have partially sunken. That look is so much better. And I can almost hear the groans coming from console designers, and I totally feel for you guys how it is significantly slower to plant on PlayStation and Xbox. But unfortunately, if you are looking for that wow factor in the visuals of your course, you're gonna have to take a little longer and put in that work. Plant that grass, make it look good, sink your bushes in. Yes, it takes time and you're at a disadvantage compared to PC people, but that is something we're looking for. We don't keep in mind, oh, well, they designed on a console, I'm gonna let up on them a bit. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. You guys are just at a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to speed, but I'm gonna use Sindre, for example, like Cape Canary and stuff. He's one of the best course designers out there and makes some of the most beautiful courses around. He does it on a PlayStation. So it is completely doable. You just need to have the patience. Okay? Another thing we look for in visuals is trying to reduce as much what we call negative space as possible. So basically that is area that is just kind of empty. There's not a whole lot going on with it. So for example, like I haven't quite finished, I'm only halfway through this course, but kind of off to the left of one here, I have a whole bunch of space here. And as you can see, I don't really have any holes planned for this area. So this is going to be kind of an area of what am I going to do with this? So it could be simple as just a tree line down. Maybe, I don't know. Could be anything at this point. I'm not sure what I'm going to put here yet, but you want to try to minimize this as much as possible. So yeah, tree line, something to reduce this, okay? Because a big area like that right in the middle of your golf course can be a bit jarring. And also, if you kind of are on the edge of a plot, really try to hide those plot edges as much as you can, or make it look as natural as you possibly can. I know make it look natural is easier said than done, believe me, but it kind of just takes some practice, and I just recommend checking out the database, checking out some of these tour-worthy courses, and really seeing what they're doing in terms of the environment to make it as immersive as possible. Other small kind of things, making sure you're keeping your plants off like the fairways. So sometimes you little pieces of grass sneak into the fairways and bushes. Just double, triple check that, make sure that's all good. And your lighting, which is a big thing. Does the lighting have to be super low and dramatic all the time? No. Really what we're asking for is just don't give us high noon, bright lighting, because that just looks awful. So really kind of consider your options with lighting, and not all lighting angles are going to look good, but you want to try to maximize as many of those good looking shots as possible. Also, what I suggest is when you are playtesting and playtest lots, play from different angles. How does the course look from 360 degrees around? Okay. And, you know, that's just kind of dropping the ball in places and just spinning around and seeing if there's anything that needs to be improved. Like, I've been struggling with this cliffside here. Do I need to improve this cliffside? I'm not sure. But 360 degrees, not just directly what's in front of you, because, you know, you could go long of the green and then you're shooting back, you're hitting back. And if you don't have anything planted back here, you know, if you just kind of have a one-way golf course, it does look a little bit silly. So sight lines too. Obviously, we've talked a lot about sight lines in my streams and course design 101 videos, but, you know, make those tee shots and second shots not unintentionally blind. Blind shots are purposeful. Blind shots are great. They're some of my favorite drives or shots in the game. But, you know, just having the random hill up right in front of the tee box to block, you know, great looking hazards that you've framed, and then you just block it, you've ruined all that work. So just make sure you're trying to avoid that. But yeah, my biggest takeaway, and what I said kind of at the beginning, is with the planting and aesthetics, make sure you are creating an environment, not just a golf course. And there you have it. Ben and I really hope that you picked up maybe a few tips that might help you bring your next course that you submit to the TGC Tour database to that next level, where you maybe get that tour-worthy status, and you have a chance, not saying it's guaranteed, but you have a chance of seeing your course get a whole ton of plays and a whole ton of looks on TGC Tours. So thank you guys for watching. Do you have any other things that we missed? We obviously probably missed a lot of stuff. So anything that we missed, anything you want us to expand on, please drop us a comment below. Make sure you like this video, and you know, it works for the algorithm and all that stuff. It gets more eyes on this video and hopefully helps as many people as possible. So again, Ben and I thank you for watching, and good luck designing.